Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to a series of 4 webinars filmed with the Food Standards Agency's Paul Tossell and Francis Hill. This event has been organised by the Canna consultants, myself, Steve Oliver and Matt Lawson, and RASB Media, who are the organisers of the CBD show. CBD show is taking place in London between the 29th and the 31st of January. We filmed 4 sessions and you are able to watch 2 presentations, one by Paul Tossell, which concerns the policy and the new structure post withdrawal from the European Union, and the second concerned Francis Hill, who deals with the content of the dossier. We filmed this as a free-to-all broadcast, and we would ask, although we don't insist, that you make a donation to the NHS COVID charities via our Just Giving page. At the end of each of the webinars, you will see a wash-up where Matt and I discuss what we think are the salient points that come out of the discussions. I'd like to thank the FSA for their honesty and taking part in these 4 webinars. And I think you'll find that they were very honest in their approach and that there is a huge amount of information for the industry. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Good morning, my name's Paul Tossell and I head up a team at the Food Standards Agency that deals with several policy areas all around the regulated products area, and one of those is the novel foods team, so hence the CBD connection. So and thank you to the organisers for this opportunity today to set out how the FSA see the regulation of CBD market and what the future needs and requires and how we're going to get there. Also, this is an opportunity to dismiss some of the incorrect information that is out there with the correct versions of things on CBD products and the CBD market. I should say that obviously the FSA covers England, Wales and Northern Ireland. In Scotland, there's Food Standards Scotland, and they take the lead on CBD policy. So when I'm talking about what the FSA's role is, that's for just England, Wales and Northern Ireland at the moment. So what I'm going to cover today in brief is why CBD extracts are novel, the regulatory frameworks that are relevant to CBD, it's quite a complex one, how the FSA fit in and what our approach is to the CBD extracts, and some good sort of considerations around the timeline, sort of breaking it up roughly until the end of the transition period up to the end of March next year, and then beyond that. So why is it that CBD extracts are regarded as novel? The basic sort of definition of a novel food comes from whether there's a history of consumption prior to 1997 within the EU. 97 May, in fact, 97 is when the regulations came into force, and if you can show a history of consumption of the product within Europe at that stage, it's not regarded as novel. Clearly, hemp has been consumed before 97. That's well understood. Hemp oil from cold compression is not novel because there's a solid history of consumption. However, a number of years ago, companies started asking us whether CBD, whether it was extracted from the cannabis plant, actually was indeed novel or not novel. We started discussions with our colleagues across Europe and with the Commission, and in January 2019, the Novel Foods Working Group, which is a EC-based one, clarified that indeed CBD extracts are novel foods. So they were then put on the catalogue as such, and that's the legal status of their position for that one. The basis for this is that if you take a refined extract from a plant, the novel regime is considered that the extract components from the existing food are novel because they likely be a different composition. So even though it's the product as a whole has been around for a while, if you change the composition by extracting it differently, then the final version is different. There are other examples of this. There's a thing called lycopenes, which is a protein from tomatoes. Clearly, tomatoes are not novel food, but if you extract the actual lycopene from it, that is indeed a novel food, and it is actually an authorized one. So So how does CBD fit into the regulatory framework issue? Well, it's quite a complex pattern. There's quite a few overlaps. Obviously, overlaps with medicines legislation. People would maybe would be aware of a drug called Epidiolex. That's actually used in a couple conditions. It's a CBD-based one. There's clearly connections with the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is a Home Office-led policy area. Obviously, that's more the THC content and also the parts of the plants that are being used. There's also sort of wider connections. The EU actually is looking at whether CBD falls within being a narcotic. It's not the UK position. CBD is regarded as not a narcotic by the Home Office. And there's also wider implications with sort of commodity-specific rules. For instance, food supplements, wider requirements on food. You've got the basic food law as well, hygiene rules, labelling. That's for the foods. And CBD is also in other commodities like cosmetics, vapes, etc. So there's wider legislation again. So quite a complex field of items to actually to legislate with. So where do we fit into it? What's the approach of the agency? Well, despite what you might have heard, there are actually only two ways to actually be compliant with CBD. Like I mentioned, cold compressed hemp oil has got a history of consumption, so it's not novel. So that's actually fine. It's actually just, let's say, food and is on the market accordingly. For CBD extracts that are novel, the only way to actually get into full compliance is via the novel foods application process, which is where we fit in, because we've been pushing industry to actually to go via that route. It's worth saying that putting in an application for a novel food status is not actually not just enough. The quality and the contents of the application have to be sufficient. My colleague Francis will be covering the risk assessment element shortly. Also worth noting that you might have heard of a Article 4 submission. An Article 4 submission is one where if there's any doubt with whether a product is novel or not, you can request clarification. It's quite a compact timescale compared to, say, the actual full application for novel food status. At the moment, because of the transition period rules, the UK can't take Article 4 submissions. It has to go to a European Union member. But that was an option. Wasn't taken forward. Now CBD having been clarified as novel, unless there's significant new evidence to prove otherwise, that's the state of the position, that the compliance route has to be via the novel foods application route. Taking a slight step back, to that working group, that was the clarification in 2019. Shortly after that, we started meeting with a range of stakeholders, industry groups, companies, etc., as many as we could find. So we started talking about the fact that that novel food status, what the implications were, that companies would need to start applications. We also talked about whether there was a history of consumption possible. Several of the organisations were still claiming, and some actually still do now, that there is a history of consumption for CBD extracts. We've been very clear all the way through that if that is true, then we're willing to have a look at the results. Obviously, like I said, it has to go to the commission now formally for Article 4 submission. But you might often hear that people's claiming there's still a history of consumption. We've not seen any sufficient evidence to do that. So we've gone on the basis that applications is the way forward. Push that with industry. A number were receptive of that idea and have actually started looking at what the application would require, gathering the information, the data, or the submissions. Others, and to be honest, the vast majority of industry, we saw insufficient evidence of a change of approach across the board. So in January this year, we actually made it clear with an announcement on our position that we thought we needed to move actively industry to compliance. So we set a deadline for applications to be in and validated by the end of March next year. Now that's a technical expression, and it's worth just taking a second to realise that validated does not mean authorised. Validated means is that the application is of sufficient quality that it meets a preset of criteria enough to actually progress on to the formal parts of the application assessment, risk assessment and the risk management parts of it. So that was the announcement in January, setting the deadline. We've got applications coming in, and we're on an informal basis. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the actual application section. Also, it's worth noting that that's only applies. The deadline only applies for a company that's got a product, a CBD product on the market already, and wants it to remain on the market after the end of March next year. For newcomers, for new products, reformulations, anything that would be regarded as new to the market, first of all, after the announcement, we said that can't happen until they've actually got prior authorization, which is how it's supposed to be done under the novel foods regulations. It would be treated exactly the same as any new novel food process coming through, etc. But there's no deadline for that, because obviously that's as and when the company decides to submit it. So the deadline only applies for where a company wishes to actually keep a product on the market. Now, to do so, it needs a validated application in by that, so that's fine. Also, it's worth to be aware that for where you've got a product on the market already, the compliance element of that might not be correct yet, and we're moving towards it, but that is still regarded as a food product. It's on the food market, so it's actually still open to all the other food regulations. It actually adhere to them. Okay. So, by the time the deadline comes up, March next year for the validated applications, that will have been over 2 years since we actually started discussions with industry. That's quite a considerable amount of time, and the fact that we've got solid applications, pretty good and developing applications already in that we're informally reviewing. We've got no actual plans to extend that deadline because of COVID. Some people have been asking that. Some have been suggesting that that's the reason they can't actually get applications in. In our view, with the 2 years, that will have been a sufficient time to actually progress it. So we have no plans to actually to change the deadline. So what's coming up next? Some discussions on the sort of the deadline part of it. Well, as I mentioned, my colleague Francis will be covering the actual process itself, the requirements under that. At the moment, we're in the EU transition period. We formally left Europe, but we're still subject to European law requirements until the end of this year. During that transition period, like I said, we can, as the UK, accept Article 4 submissions. The legal process is that any new applications have to still go to the EC, and that's another slightly misunderstood one. Often people quote that they go to FSA. No, they go to the European Commission. The European Commission do the validation step process, and if an application is of sufficient quality, it then passes it to FSA. So legally, that's still the position. So when we made our announcement and we said that for now we're encouraging people to actually get applications into the EC to actually start the process, that's purely because it's the legal position. At the same time, we offered informally to look at the actual applications, because obviously we're aware that the deadline of March only gives us January to March to actually formally do the validation process, which isn't a tight window. Sorry, it is a tight window, and we understand that, but that seems the most appropriate date for us to deal with it. So the offer's there to actually sort of look over informally the dossiers to aid them, so that takes the pressure off submitting a good quality application early next year. Throughout the rest of this year, while we cannot formally accept applications until the end of it, we will still be monitoring industry. We are still engaging with industry, having meetings when we actually have new things to discuss, or the organisations and such have new things to tell us on progress with their applications and such like. So we're keeping an eye on the industry and helping where we can to actually move towards compliance status. Some other parts we've picked up on are suggestions that taking off the letter CBD off a product actually is going to bypass the requirements on the novel foods. That's simply not true. Obviously, there is a legal requirement because, like I said, if it's being sold as something that is not a narcotic, is not a medicine, and it's consumed, it's a food. Therefore, it's subject to food law, and food law requires that products are labelled accurately, they reflect what they are. There's some very precise requirements on labelling. So just want to dispel that rumour here that the food information for consumers rules and other labelling rules actually require clarity on those ones. So that's sort of what we're seeing up to March of next year. So what happens after that? Well, where an application has been validated, so that means like I said, it is of sufficient quality and of content that it is viable to go into the actual assessment process, then those products linked to that validated application can continue to be marketed. Where there isn't, then we will be informing local authorities that the product can either be voluntarily withdrawn or enforcement action can be proceeded. Enforcement action on CBD products could actually take place anytime. Could have taken place any time after it was included in the catalogue and clarified that it is novel food, because simply they shouldn't be on the market, in theory, beforehand. We took a proportionate response and decided we were going to, give a grace period to actually deal with the applications, but like I said, because of the lack of actually movement in the industry, or the apparent lack of movement in the industry, we brought in this deadline. The consequences of not taking applications forward in a serious manner of sufficient quality is the fact that will then result in products being eligible for enforcement action. They shouldn't be on the list. The mechanism for how we're actually going to do that is one we're looking at. Clearly, we've got until the end of March. We don't want to wait until then, because we want to make sure the local authorities are aware of how they need to actually assess whether a product is allowed to proceed or whether it actually should be removed from the market. And we'll make it clear. We'll tell everybody that what the mechanism for that is, so that companies, manufacturers, and everybody else that's involved in the process is very clear on on what the correct procedures will be. Should add again that obviously that's still during that process, all the other food law still applies. So local authorities won't just be ignoring CBD products. They'll they're still a food product, so they will still be actually looking to make sure that all the other requirements under food law, like hygiene, etc., are adhered to. Okay, but that's how we see the process. So let's run through of things. So just going to take the opportunity to sort of summarize, where we are. To be absolutely clear, CBD extracts are novel. They will require authorization. Article 4 submissions are not a protection in law for CBD. I've heard it quoted that if you put in an Article 4, that gives you the right not to have to do anything else. That's simply not true. Everything still applies, even if you were to put an Article 4 in, you're still going to actually, apply to the law until it's decided whether it is a novel food or not. Validating applications will be needed if you wish to carry on selling existing products after the end of March next year. a product must be linked to a validated application. Products that are not linked to such an application are subject to enforcement rules. Local authorities will be informed, and that they should not be selling after the end of March. Applications already progressing. Some of them quite advanced. Like I already said, we can't. That's only on an informal basis at the moment. But we have got a good number of applications in that we're seeing good content, and we're feeding back informally to the companies on. And because of that apparent improvement in actual move towards compliance, we are minded not to actually extend the deadline due to the COVID COVID issue. Any changes that we do come up with how we see the next steps, or anything, any further forms of clarification, because we do get questions, and we understand that communications can always be improved. If there's things that make it clearer, they'll be reflected on our website, and we'll make sure that we include those stakeholders that we are aware of that of these changes, and making every opportunity to make sure that everybody is clear on the way forward. So thank you for that. I think that's where we are with the FSA in terms of opposition.